the Taliban is a Islamic Wahhabi strain of Islam-based terrorist organization, is it not?
It is a Sunni terrorist organization, yes.
And it's a Wahhabi-based Sunni terrorist organization, is that correct?
Similar ideology, yes, Congressman.
And the Wahhabi strain of Islam is a very extreme fundamentalist strain, which undergirds the Saudi monarchy. Correct?
The Saudi monarch, I mean, Wahhabism obviously emanates from Saudi Arabia. It originated in Saudi Arabia, and there has been an historic relationship between the royal family, if you will, and Wahhabi religious leaders, yes.
Yeah, and the Wahhabist strain of Islam is behind the 18,000 plus madrasas or Islamic schools that teach this fundamentalist strain of Islam. Isn't that correct?
There's no question that the Taliban originates from the madrasas in Pakistan. That's correct.
And isn't it also true that the Taliban gets support from Saudi Arabia, from the Saudi Arabian government?
Yeah, Congressman, I don't have any specific information, certainly as a part of the Afghan Study Group, that can point to any specific country as providing material resources to the Taliban. I'm not suggesting that's not true. I can't comment on it.
Well, it just seems to me that if we identify the sources, the revenue sources of the Taliban, we can weaken them and maybe even eliminate them as a threat if we choke off their resources. And my suggestion is that Saudi Arabia may, in fact, be a major source of revenue and resource for the Taliban. And I think America's policy should not be at cross purposes with itself. If we're supporting the Saudis who are supporting the Taliban, we are at cross purposes with ourselves. And those are the kinds of things that I believe we should look to in being able to solve this problem that we have. We don't want to leave Afghanistan and leave it to the Taliban to establish another Wahhabi-based nation, which would be a lawless nation. Drugs, terrorism would flow with impunity. And we would have to go back in at some point to protect our interests, like we had to go in after September 11th, 2001, 20 years ago. So we, am I off base?
Congressman, you're not. The only thing I'll tell you from my past experience is that, identifying resources as one of the, critical capabilities of the Taliban is something that we have looked at for a long time, and we've looked at trying to interdict those sources of revenue. In my experience, we found that the sources of revenue for the Taliban are fairly diverse and fairly resilient. Again, large part of it comes from the opioid trade inside of Afghanistan, but they have proven to be pretty resilient in their ability to develop resources. And I'm unaware of any single source of income that we could go after in the immediate future to have a big impact, but that's not something that we should continue to look at that for sure.
We have followed that chain of causation from the Wahhabi supported and Wahhabi sustained madrasas in northern Pakistan and southern Afghanistan. We've met with the royal family in Saudi Arabia, urging them. We don't have evidence that the Saudi government is supporting the madrasas, but we do feel there's money coming out of the Gulf or maybe from members of the Saudi royal family who are supporting those efforts. So the gentleman's target is spot on. There are wider problems, as Ms. Lindborg has pointed out, with the Pashtun nature of this. But like I say, the gentleman's remarks were well received.
What do the people of Afghanistan think right now of the Taliban, of the Afghan government? And I talked to a guy who was over in Afghanistan about 4 years ago, who worked for me a little. What do they think of the United States?
Yeah, I can start just, my mic's open and let the other co-chairs jump in. The one thing that we heard universally from the Afghans, and we spent a lot of time, as the other co-chairs mentioned, with civil society, Afghan leaders. And there is a very strong consensus for peace inside of Afghanistan. But to be candid, not peace at any cost. And they all emphasize the need to protect the gains that have been made in Afghanistan over the past 2 decades with regard to civil society, women, and so forth. And they also said that any future Afghanistan must be consistent with the values that are memorialized in the current Constitution. And with regard to, and now I'm not speaking about the Taliban, but I'm speaking about Afghans that are in the government and civil society. I think universally they recognize the important role that the United States continues to play in brokering a peace agreement and bringing stability and security to Afghanistan. I don't think it'd be an overstatement to say that they view us as indispensable in that regard. With regard to the Taliban, I think I would just conclude by saying there's a high degree of mistrust across Afghan society about the Taliban and about the ability to have them included in a future government. But this is really the gist of what has to occur inside of the Afghan peace negotiation. Is they've got to come up with a framework within which there can be a character of government that is consistent with the values of the Constitution and yet allows the political differences that clearly exist in Afghanistan to be settled without force. And I'll let the other co-chairs follow up if I missed something.
One thing I would comment on is that the Afghanistan of today is different than the Afghanistan that the Taliban ruled 20 years ago. And that's because of civil society, and the notion that the members of this civil society and the people are going to accept that same kind of rule, I think, is a very different situation, and that won't be acceptable to them if we go back to 20 years ago. So just a point that we heard over, and I'm sure many of you have also heard that when you've traveled to Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was struck by the number of young people on social media. I mean, that by itself, I would think, would dramatically change the thinking of the average person, as opposed to the more agrarian society that we had 20 years ago. I'll narrow it down, though, because I talked to a guy who, like I said, it worked to me. Do the average Afghans have a high or low opinion of the United States? Does it bother them that they're there? Do they like us? Do they view us as a positive force, or do they view us as a bunch of outsiders who they wish we should get out of there?
My own experience in that regard is not one voice. I think all Afghans, out of pride, would wish that they could protect themselves and not require U.S. forces to be there. I think that's a fair statement. Clearly, those of the same ideology as the Taliban want the United States gone. I think universally, the assessment of the rest of the Afghans, even those that want to see us eventually gone, recognize that at least for the near term, and particularly in the context of bringing about peace and getting a peace agreement for the Afghan peace negotiations, they want the United States perhaps to leave at some point, but not precipitously.
I hate saying that, but I do believe that a footprint of some sort, like we have a footprint in Europe and other places, is going to be necessary for our own personal security.
It is critically important that we in the United States continue to support the women and girls of Afghanistan.
We've gone from over 100,000 forces on the ground in Afghanistan when I was in command in 2013 and 14 to 2,500 forces right now, which in the context of our grander strategy is certainly, in my judgment, a sustainable level.